We are here today, the day on what would have been my mother's 95th birthday, to reconnect Ralph with the place he grew up and often spoke of. As there has been a lot of discussion of genealogy recently in the family, let's review the history of our branch. Both my parents separately left Germany for Italy when things were getting bad, not yet at a point where they were fleeing. This took vision on the part of my father and grandmother, as my mother was still young. My father received medical training in Italy and practiced there, marrying an Italian woman and having a son, my brother Paul. It was several years after arriving in Italy, particularly after Italy switched sides, that the Nazis began interfering in Italian internal affairs. This meant that instead of building a career, my father had to effectively go underground to survive. Instead of enjoying a typical teenager and then advancing her education, my mother was fleeing to Switzerland when her landlord said she could no longer cover for them. Eventually, my parents did get through the necessary hoops to get here and happened to meet on the freighter that took them to Norfolk. They came with no money, limited language skills, and a foreign medical degree that was only good enough to work at a state hospital. Well outside the city at the time, the Funny Farm, but it did come with housing at nominal cost. All our neighbors were also doctors. Of course, housing, maintenance, even laundry was provided during employment. So for the 18 years that Ralph was growing up, that was the life. Learning the language, culture, getting the U.S. medical certification, getting better housing that came with seniority, and still not having to manage a mortgage or a property. 50 years ago, on January 19th, that employment and lifestyle abruptly ended with my father's sudden death. My mother knew from previous instances that there would be pressure to move. Telling the director as he was at the door making the condolence call that night that we would be out soon. He assured us that was not the purpose of his visit. Don't worry about that, he said, but that patience was short-lived. So in the period of the next 6 months, Ralph had to grow up fast. It was graduating from high school and the usual senior activities. He was president of the Temple Youth Group. He had to select a college, I think actually reselect a college, that was more accessible without a parent that drove. We had to find another place to live, pack up the house, hopefully stay through graduation, and leave the only neighborhood he had known. And of course, there was loss to deal with. Also, my step-grandfather, who had been with my grandmother since before Ralph was born, had also suddenly passed away right after Thanksgiving, less than 2 months prior to my father. So there was also that grieving and helping my grandmother. And he had to do it all, side by side, with my mother. Two strong personalities with weak filters, sharing a common purpose. One grew up in war-torn Europe, moving from Germany to Italy to Switzerland, back to Italy, and ultimately to the U.S. from the ages of 13 to 25. The other, a child of the rebellious 60s. I think they were actually at their best then. There was no room for anything else. My mother was at least able to hold off pressure to move until after Ralph graduated, but that was it. For her, the spring was a whirlwind of getting answers about my father's death, estate work, planning for the next phase while providing a somewhat normal life for us. Her 45th birthday, 50 years ago today, also a Saturday, this area would probably have a big ball game going. The smaller kids might have a game going on their own field behind those buildings. For my mother, this was not a great time for celebration. For Ralph, there would be no post-graduation summer, hanging out with friends, no trips to Palisades Park, no lengthy college freshman return trip in the winter to reconnect. After we moved, there was a whole new life to deal with. We had family nearby, which certainly helped. As an 8-year-old, I swapped a bunch of ball-playing friends for another bunch. But for Ralph and my mother, they now had a new area to adapt to. no peer group, and a house to run. Lawns had to be mowed, laundry done, dishes washed, home maintenance. Here that was done by patients. There we had to learn it all. People might wonder what living among patients was like. While this was a tight community, it was also a varied one. I'm no expert at mental health history. I know a lot of things that went on in those buildings across the street. But there were all levels of mental illness being treated. There were no group homes then, so for those able, they would have day jobs, often here. My memories are of pretty free flow between the hospital and the staff area, both of patients, doctors, and families. Ralph would often be on the other side of the fence. The golf course is over there. I think some shopping and other services were over there as well, probably run by patients. And patients were often over here, as handymen, groundskeepers, painters, and domestics. Yes, right in our homes, often on a daily basis. While maintenance was provided by the state, we could hire patients for a nominal rate to provide additional service. In some ways, our vocabulary was atypical. There were the German words interspersed with English. We really didn't know which ones were appropriate for use in polite company. And words like patients took on a different meaning. To us, it was like the help or workman. If something was broken, it was maybe a patient can fix it. When we went to our own doctor and were announced as "your patient is here," we thought we might have chores to do before the exam. The doctors themselves were atypical. Many were refugees from World War II, the Cold War, and later Asia and Latin America. A Russian doctor was arrested for spying not far from the grounds. So Ralph grew up interacting with all types of people. He would often come home with stories of someone doing unusual things. My mother would often feel the need to confirm, was he a patient? This in fact was interning for a career or two before even starting the coursework. Ralph liked Jerry Springer. As Ralph pointed out, also had a German Jewish background. For those that didn't know or remember, it was one of the original reality confrontation shows. I felt it was exploitive. I once asked Ralph how, as a social services professional, could he support such a show. He said, on the contrary, these people are doing exactly what they want to do, and this will be probably the pinnacle of their accomplishments. He said that is the purpose of a social service work, to help people do what they want to do. And when I think about it, through all his career shifts, helping people was a central theme. Whether in social work, financial planning, or teaching, different demographics, ages, and resources, but one theme: helping people reach their full potential. In his last few months, he was still teaching at a community college level, not for the small paycheck, but to be out among people and helping. He even contacted Pam about a student who was moving up our way and would be looking for work. Even for himself, his various sales and investment ideas and career changes were oriented around attempts to reach his own full potential. His sons are independent and successful, with testimony to his efforts. But it was not just for people. On our visit to Georgia a couple years ago, when Adam's dog Harpo was suffering from arthritis, Ralph researched and implemented physical therapy techniques for him. He never lamented other successes. In fact, he often embraced them. He often spoke of people he knew, what they were doing, and even researched them. More recently, when I called to inquire about his own health, he would start talking about these findings, and I would have to gently shift him back to talking about himself. After a post-exam personal conversation he had with one of his doctors, he got interested in his background and found out the doctor's father was a Pulitzer Prize winner. His last 2 emails to me were a link to this bio and some ideas to enhance an Android app that I'm working on. What becomes of this area has been discussed in the town for many years. Orange is the New Black has done filming mostly on the other side of the fence, but some over here. There was talk of other studios. In any case, one day these buildings will be gone, and this is our chance to connect Ralph with this place in the way he would have wanted it.